Have you seen that door in the old Winkworth Road? You know the one, bang opposite where Woolies used to be. Well, if you look carefully, you'll realise it's not a door at all. There's no handle, there's no hinges, and there's no lock. In fact, it's just 3 upright planks bolted to the brick surround. But hop up onto the old flint wall, you'll see it goes into an alcove about 3 foot deep and 4 foot wide, with a slate roof to protect it from rain. Curious little affair, isn't it? Well, it ought to be. It holds a terrible secret. At one time, in the late 1800s, there was a water pump there. Not very attractive, just a handle with an outlet over a metal grill above a deep well that went right down into the aquifer. It was one of 3 pumps in the town, although it was the deepest. The other 2 were quite attractive and fairly ornate, although they weren't as deep, and consequently they ran dry in hot weather, particularly in the summer. The Victorians were good engineers on the whole, and they always wanted to improve things. But as the town grew, these pumps and the wells under people's houses were just not sufficient for a growing population. A new reservoir was constructed at one end of town. Pipes were laid, and the novelty of having running water in people's houses became available. No more mucking about with buckets and pails and other water containers all hours of the day and night. But with the added water, of course, came the need for waste removal. And the same engineers realised that they could harness that steam power and not only bring water into people's houses nice and clean, but they could retrieve the dirty water at the same time. The problem, unforeseen at installation, was the proximity of the pipes. Too confident were the engineers, too impatient were the councillors, and too limited was the budget. But worse than that, too close was the wastewater pipe to the clean water pipe. Buried deep beneath the ground, it's difficult to detect leakage. It's bad enough if one pipe fails, but if a second pipe adjacent to the first fails, it can be disastrous. Contamination led to outbreaks of typhoid, small numbers at first but gradually increasing, and deaths too. The advice was to boil the water until the problem was solved. But how do you solve the problem if you don't know where the contamination is? People were scared to use the new tap water, and quite rightly so, but even the old wells and the pumps. But a few of the elites knew the water pumps were perfectly safe. They were deeper than the reservoir and connected to the aquifer, far below the town. It was summer, and 2 of the pumps only provided a limp trickle, but the one in Winkworth Road was far better. And then, curiously, a door was placed in front of it, a proper door, not the 6 planks we spoke about earlier, a door with a lock and a notice in black reporting the dangers of the water contained within the pump. And yet, oddly, some of the town councillors and the well-to-do were observed opening the door and disappearing in, and then emerging sometime later with hefty water containers. And when questioned, they would respond, testing it. The water needs thorough testing. It took several months for them to find the leaky pipes and expose them, and 2 more before they had laid new pipes at a sufficient distance that contamination was impossible. And all the while the hospitals were overrun with the sick and dying, and the crematoriums were busier than was respectable. Even the mayor, shirking his duties, had run off and left the town to it. Curiously, however, the other councillors and elites, previously impervious to the disease, were becoming ill themselves. Just as the town was returning to health and the running water was deemed safe to drink, the governors of the town were either too ill to get out of bed or dying. Perhaps, one observer noted, that the elites were sampling some of the water from the pump, the one in Winkworth Road. After all, they'd been observed carrying great quantities from it. So the water was tested, and surprisingly it came back as heavily contaminated. In fact, far worse than that in the reservoir. Wishing to get to the bottom of the problem, the pump was removed, the grill was lifted, and a couple of engineers were lowered into the deep hole. There was much consternation as the decomposed body of the mayor was brought up from the well. No wonder the other councillors were ill. But how did it get there? A confession ran in the local paper a few weeks later. It seems that the mayor had been followed to the old pump in Winkworth Road and had left the door ajar. A widower who had followed him in there caught the mayor red-handed filling up his own personal containers. So incensed was the man who'd just lost his wife and 2 kids to this terrible disease, and angry at the hypocrisy, he bashed the mayor over the head, removed the grill and pushed the body down into the well. He went to prison, holding his head up high with a clean conscience, just as the old door to Winkworth Road was removed and sealed up for evermore. Cheers.